Okay.
Okay, we are recording. Well, Karla, welcome to my channel. It's wonderful to have you. We have spoken a little bit on the phone and we've texted, but I would like for you to kind of introduce yourself like Paul Vanderklay does with his guests. Introduce yourself to the people that are looking at my channel, if you would, please.
Oh, yes. Well, thank you, Mary, for having me on. Like you said, we've chatted in the past. I saw you when you were on Paul the first time and just fell in love with you. And then saw you again on Paul. And I thought, oh, I just need to reach out to her. And so, like you said, we conversed. So, yeah, my name is Karla Sears. We currently live in Southern California area. And real quick, I'm a homeschooling mom. We have 3 sons total, an adult son that doesn't live in the house anymore. And then we also have 2 younger ones that, well, they're teenagehood. One's 13 and the other one is 11, going to be 12. So I've been homeschooling them ever since they started school, so about 5 years old. And we go with the classical model of schooling. And I just love talking all things of philosophy and theology. I love anything that has to do with the arts and also with physical fitness. And then I remember I started doing the permaculture that you shared with me so kindly. And so I've been learning more about that. And we're Christians. But I like to think about all ideas. And I think it's good to be open at the same time as you grow in your faith. So.
Good. So what is your own personal faith background?
I am Christian, just evangelical. I've run the gamut. I've dabbled in Catholicism and I've done that and learned more about that. But mostly was raised under the evangelical frame. But sometimes you can enter into a theological crisis, and I have ran into that. And so it was one of those things where you realize maybe certain things, the way that I was taught about certain things, I need to question a bit. Not in the question of my faith in Christ and who Christ is and God, but all the other things out in the peripheral that religion tries to bleed in, or different people like to say from the pulpit. So,
Right.
It's just constant growing and learning and being open obviously to the Holy Spirit and how he changes your heart.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you've been following the Paul Vanderklay channel, and I know you've also been looking at some of John Vervaeke's stuff.
Yeah.
And some of the whole conversation in this corner of the internet. So how has that been for you? What's really struck you? And I know you also listen to Bishop Barron, right? So
Yeah.
how's that been influencing you, or what new ideas has that prompted in you?
Well, Paul, what I love about Paul is that how open he is, and the knowledge that he does have, and how he has his convictions, which I absolutely can understand, and I can agree with a lot. But how he has that open mind, and so I love that about him. And so I've learned so much under his teaching, which then led to John Vervaeke. I just love John Vervaeke. I think he's a kind, loving man that's trying to understand this meaning crisis. And you really see that being on the west side of the coast at times, and under the schooling system. Even though I homeschool my kids, I taught in the public school system. I have friends that have kids in that system, and I have friends that teach in that system. So even though my children aren't immersed in that system, and before I say anything else regarding that, is I do not want to paint like a broad brush all over that. There is good and bad, and whatever you choose to put your children, your family in, the road that you're on. So I don't want to give all these things, that generalization. I think it's all like that.
Right.
So that being said, there are just some huge flaws within that system that I can see that's added to this meaning crisis. Bishop Barron, oh, that man, I have learned from him too. And that's what I feel like I'm this mixed bag of, if you look at Catholicism and Orthodox, like I love Jonathan Peugeot. I mean, sorry, that's my dog. If you hear that little, they probably want to go for a walk. You all have to wait. I've learned from him amazingly well also. So I like to look at these different disciplines and gain the wisdom from them. And yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Okay. Well, are there any topics that you're particularly interested in talking about with me, or any questions you have, or things that we could discuss together?
Yeah, I sent you those links.
Right, I did look at all of them.
Right. And so there was that one with Bishop Barron,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it was I think the gentleman's last name was Black. I forget the gentleman's name that he was talking with. But so anyways, that was a very interesting conversation. I just wanted to know what your take was regarding that, and how he was talking about, I wrote down some notes, and how Bishop Barron was talking about the I don't know if you remember, he mentioned Ratzinger, the one the book that you're going through.
Right, Introduction to Christianity. He did mention it. Yeah, I saw that. He did.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah, he did. And so what he was like pretty much was talking about was how the ancient fathers, right? How they decided to look at logos and mythos, and how they chose the logos over the mythos.
Mm-hmm.
And it was talking about, where has religion gone regarding taking out the philosophy aspect of it. And when that has kind of been dropped and left on the weight side, it's almost left this emptiness in some aspect, this gap. Right. So what he was like talking about, he was just saying how the reason why they chose the logos was they wanted, he said that, sorry, I'm just trying to find it right here. He said the early fathers, they tried not to go with the mythology tradition. They went more with the philosophical tradition. They saw that it was a greater congruence, a more harmony, agreement going with the logos revelation of the tradition, and with like looking at the Greeks and all of that as well. Right. And so and the reason why he said that was because when you start to peel away, you wanted to go something that was more real, with the logos instead of the mythos of something that, yes, it's a wonderful story and you gain some knowledge and some wisdom, but it wouldn't be grounded real as the logos. So I don't know if you remember that part of the conversation.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Yeah. I was wondering what your take was on that.
Well, I think that Bishop Barron is reiterating something that's deeply in the Catholic tradition, which is an understanding that there were really two, in a way, we could say, two preparations for the gospel. That one of the preparations was, of course, the Hebrew Old Testament and the prophets, the preparation of the people through the law, through the understanding of God's moral law, and also with it, as St. Paul says, the recognition that without some kind of further assistance of God's grace, we cannot under our own power keep that law. We go back to, like Ezekiel said, that we needed to have our hearts changed by God. We need a new covenant, right? Not just that old covenant. And so all of these things led up to and culminated in the revelation of Christ, so that when Christ comes, he comes into a prepared culture, a prepared people, ready and waiting for the Messiah. And then he validates the Old Testament. Now, sometimes Christians get this a little confused. Sometimes Christians will say that the prophecies of the Old Testament, prove that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. Like, they'll look at a list of prophecies: born of a virgin, born in Bethlehem, by, the suffering servant passages in Isaiah and all of this. And they'll say, well, see, this proves that Jesus is the Messiah. Well, that's kind of flipping it around backwards, because what it is that when Jesus died on the cross and then rose from the dead, he proved he was God. And so he validates the Old Testament. See, there's a scripture in Deuteronomy that says that if a prophet speaks a word, claims it's from God, but it doesn't come true, then it's not from God. So when he makes the prophecies come true, he proves that those prophecies were from God. It's not that the prophecies prove him, but he validates the prophecies. So we have that as a preparation through history, going all the way back to the promises to Abraham, and even all the way back to the promises in the garden in Genesis about, the seed of the woman. All of these things that culminate in Christ. Okay, so that's one preparation. It's the preparation through history through the Jewish people. Now, there's a second preparation of the world for Christ, and this is what the fathers of the church believed. That there's another preparation that happened, and that was the preparation of providing for the church something that would enable them to communicate this truth about Christ to all of the people of the world in a way that would engage the human intellect. So they believed that was the Greek language and the Greek philosophy was a second preparation of the world for the gospel. So it's really important to place these things in the historic context. There's a scripture in Deuteronomy that says that God had arranged all of the nations on earth in order to have his people in a particular place. And so when you go back and you look at history and you see what happened with the Hellenization, with, when Alexander the Great basically conquered the known world and brought those Greek ideas to all of the, civilizations of the world, and the Greek language permeated the whole area where Christ was going to be born, that then provided for the church the language that it would need to communicate the truths about Christ to the world. And in fact, Romano Guardini, who was a very famous theologian in the 20th century, made this statement. He said that in order for the term logos to be available to sacred Christology, that is, to be available for St. John to use in the book of John to identify Christ as the Word, in order for that word, logos, to be available, he said, Greek thought labored for 500 years. So the thought of the church is that these are both ways in which God prepared the world for the coming of Christ. And so it's a union. Basically, it's a union of the Greek philosophical tradition and that Hebrew prophetic tradition together is what we have as Christians, that we own both of them, that both of them were provided to us by God, and that we have both of them available to us. No, because of where the church was founded and because of its movement to the city of Rome, St. Peter and St. Paul both being martyred in Rome, with its, some people feel also that there's actually a third preparation, which was the administrative capabilities and organizational capabilities of Rome. But that's not nearly as strong of a thread as what we have with the Greek and the Hebrew, because of course that is actually in the New Testament. New Testament's written in Greek for the most part. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I love how you put that. And it just makes me think, when you said that, it makes me think about one of the reasons why I contacted you and say, oh, I just need to talk about these ideas. Because when I listened, so John Vervaeke had the last conversation he had with Paul Vanderklay, and then he had that other conversation with one of the last conversations he had with Rebel Wisdom.
Right.
There was an ongoing theme that I saw through how I perceived it through my eyes, because John Vervaeke was talking about, having this dialogue, okay, having a dialectic, okay,
Right.
form, right? A form of how to deal with this meaning crisis, right? And all of this. And all along as I've been listening and watching and thinking and kind of embodying all these thoughts and all of these ideas, because I'm an educator at heart, or at least partly, I'm like, it has to do, and as much as I've done my own studies in the classical way, the traditional classical way of teaching and learning, I was not taught classically because I was born after the 19th century, so very hard to find. Yeah, but you reclaim your own education, right?
Right.
And that's one of the wonderful things about homeschooling, because when you homeschool your children and you at least the way that we do it under the organization we do it, we're reclaiming our own education as well. And so we call ourselves just the lead learner, right? I just need to be a lead learner. Doesn't mean I need to be an expert in everything. I just have to be willing and be humbled enough to learn. So that's something we constantly talk to our kids about as well. So anyways, so one of the things was, when John Vervaeke was talking to Paul and to the gentleman of Rebel Wisdom, it was this whole thing. So I kept thinking, this conversation also needs, in my humble opinion, needs to talk about the educational system. Because all of this that we can talk about, we can say, children are being filtered through an educational system that sees the world, not all, but a good portion, sees the world differently in the curricula they aspire to, what they bring to the table, who are the people at the districts, the supervisors, all of these things. What are the laws that are being passed down? All of these things culminate under the educational system. And to me, that's a huge part, because children are sent off to school for 6, 7, 8 hours a day. And then they come home, and moms and dads are busy coming home and cooking and cleaning and what have you, trying to get food on the table, taking a bath, get your kids in bed, give them a kiss, read them a bedtime story. We start it all over again. So a lot of their major influences are there at the schools. And so when John was talking to Paul about dialectic, it just made me think about the classical way of learning. I don't know. So do you have just a few minutes? I was going to just go over, or you don't know
Sure,
where
go,
I could
go
contribute?
ahead. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I listened to different podcasts, they're classical guru people that I have sat under teaching. And one of the guys that I really love listening to his name is Andrew Kern. And so, okay, so when you think about the classical way of learning, this dates back to the Middle Ages, even for back ancient times, right? It wasn't until the Industrial Revolution. We'll get to that. Dewey's a big name that people need to start learning, because he changed the system in Europe and America, okay, of the way the kids learn. Okay, so if you think about classical education, it's under 7 liberal arts. That's what we call it. Okay, and the liberal arts is pretty much a cultivation of the soul. So what we say is we try to cultivate our children in wisdom and virtue through the nurturing of the soul and truth, goodness, and beauty by the way of the 7 liberal arts. Okay, now the 7 liberal arts are divided into three arts of language and 4 arts of mathematics. Okay,
Right.
the 3 arts, right? It's the trivium, which, okay, we know tri means 3 in Latin. Okay, and then the second part, trivium, that means way. So there's 3 ways and there's 4 ways. Okay, so this dates back. Okay, like I said, it's been tested, it's been taught, tested, proven, it's been looked at, talked about, and experienced for like 2,000 years, this type of way of learning and thinking. Okay, so like back in the 7th century, but back in the 4th century, that's when they codified. Okay, so the early like the Greeks and some of the also early church fathers, all of that, they codified back in the 4th century. They codified this system, okay, of a curriculum, okay, of a way of thinking. In the 7th century, that's when they came up with like either textbooks or the arts, things to read. In the 19th century, there were still some places that still taught in this manner. But once, and he said this, I love that he said this. He said, but, okay, so it was still taught this way in some places back, okay, in the 19th century.
And by he, you're talking about Andrew Kern.
About Andrew Kern, right.
I've read him.
Say that?
I have read him before.
Yes. Okay. So, you know, okay. So, but as thought, but he says, but as thought started to disintegrate, right? As we started, as we stopped learning in the ways of how to think, right? One of our mottos that we have in classical education with CC that I do is that we teach children how to think, not what to think, right? So as that thought process started to disintegrate, then that classical way of learning started to go by the wayside. Okay, so then that's when Dewey kind of started to kick in. I'll get to him in a little bit. But okay, so if you think about, there's branches of learning. So you've got like branches of learning, you think of discipline. So you have people say, you have the science disciplines, right? And all the different, physical science, social science, that type of thing, right? And the science of language arts and all that, and all of that. But the trunk of that are the 7 liberal arts. So if we look at the 3, the trivium, those are the 3 arts of language, is, okay, so what you have are logic, grammar, and rhetoric. Those are the arts. Right. But the way of the trivium. So
grammar first, then logic and rhetoric.
Right. That's the stages.
Right.
But if you're talking about the art of it, so there are the stages, you're absolutely correct. There are the stages you learn through the grammar stage, right? Memorization. Then the dialectic, you start putting the who, the why, the where, the how to that language. And then the rhetoric, that's when you're able to, write a thesis about it and teach about it and all that. But the art of it, it doesn't matter the order of it. So he would say, you have logic, grammar, or rhetoric with the art of it. So he says that if we're looking under, so I'm just checking my notes real quick. If we're under the grammar state of art, grammar constructs, so you're under the stage of grammar as an art, and you're learning to construct a thought. So a thought that's cohesive. So like, for example, if you say, the horse is blue, that is the grammar, the art of thought, okay? You're putting you have a subject and a predicate that agrees, right? It's cohesive. Then you have the art of logic. Logic is when you're taking a series of sentences, putting that together, right? Trying to make it cohesive. So you might have the horse is blue, but all horses are black. But your mind goes, wait a second, that's not a cohesive thought, right? That's under logic. Then you have the rhetoric, the art of rhetoric. He says it's the art of bringing cohesive to your community. He says,
Oh, I like that.
I do too. I love that. And it made me think of John Vervaeke when he's talking about that. And he says, so the art of rhetoric is the art of bringing a cohesive to community. He says, it's not the art of persuasion. And he gives a definition. He loves the definition of Aristotle's art of persuasion. And this is what Aristotle says. He says, Aristotle says rhetoric, this day and age, rhetoric is just being decisive, right? Just, I'm going to try to get you, all this rhetoric going around, right? People yelling and screaming, right? That if the true definition of rhetoric, that's not what it is. That's modernity's way of looking at rhetoric. So Aristotle said this. He says, rhetoric is the art. Sorry, I'm trying to read my writing. Oh yeah, okay, fine. Rhetoric is the art of finding all of the available means of persuasion. So that's Aristotle's definition of rhetoric. So he pretty much says, in a nutshell, Andrew Kern says, the goal of logic is to bring harmony to the mind. That's what we want to teach our children. The goal of grammar is to bring harmony to a thought. And the goal of rhetoric is to bring harmony to a community.
Okay.
And that is, you can go dive so deep in the classical way of thinking, but I thought, yes.
Yeah, that does tie in really nicely with what John Vervaeke has been saying about dialogue and how incomplete, even if your own thinking is logical, and even if you're able to string your own thoughts together well in your own mind, you're not complete in yourself. You still need to be with others, and you still need to talk about these things and refine them in dialogue, because that's partly because of our imperfection and limitation, but it might also be that's not even an imperfection. It may just be that's how God made us. He made us to be communicators with one another and to be in communion with one another.
Right. And yeah, and he goes on and he talks about that the Greeks, they looked at that at language and they looked what makes us different from the human, from other species, from animals. He says something that human beings have that animals don't have is that we have language and we have mathematics. We're able to count things and we're able to speak, right? And so those things were important. So that's where the triviums come out of that. The seven little parts come out of that, of the Greeks' way of thinking. And then that with this part of the whole dialectic way of learning is something that we have something that's called the 5 common topics. So you think about Socrates and his Socratic dialogues that he would have when he was going out among the people, right, and talking, what do you think the meaning of life is, or what do you think the meaning of this is, or we tell a story, what should this person have done or not done, right? Having this Socratic types of dialogues and holding, and people would come around these courtyards and listen, right? And one of the things that we have in our discussions and with especially our older children, our middle school and high school level, is something called the 5 common topics. And the 5 common topics have to do their definitions. So you always define your terms, what that is, right? It's comparison, right? How do you compare this thing to another thing or to another discipline? That was something that John Vervaeke brought up in one of his talks. I think it was with Rebel Wisdom. He said that part of the problem with the educational today, everything is so isolated. So I go into my classroom and I'm just learning about biology, right? And that's it. They don't cross discipline and say, well, how did this learning about biology and this in this time, how was that affecting what was happening over here across the world to this group of people, or affecting history, or affecting social science? It's always just so isolated in its own discipline. So we talk about comparison. You compare this thing to itself or to something else. The other thing is relationship. So we talk about what's the definition, what are the comparisons, what is the relationship to that thing with itself, or with something else, or with myself, or with yourself, right? With our world, with our country, with our community. We talk about, and then it's also circumstances. What were the circumstances around the situation that caused it to happen or not caused it to happen, right? And there's all these questions you can ask with that. And then the last thing is testimony. Who's the authority in this? Is there authority in this? So that's always on the basis of a lot of the discussion that we go through. And the children just learn to embody this, right? So they're having these dialogues, right? You're having this dialectic, and then it gets to this rhetoric stage. So they start to have that vocabulary. They start to have those thoughts. They start to learn how to think, why am I feeling this way, right? It's like you learn to think and you have a thought because you ask a question. So you have to teach your children on how to ask good questions, right? Because that's what elicits the thought of learning, right? That can get you, when you feel stuck, if you're able to ask the right type of question, it can get you beyond you being stuck. But I see a lot of kids just being stuck, and then they just resort to violence, or they just get depressed. And I don't know. I just can go on this. So anyways, I'll stop there, but your thought, but I definitely
I like what you said about asking questions, because I have a friend who likes to say that people are not ready to hear the answers to questions they haven't asked yet. And so one of the things I really liked when Jordan Peterson came on the scene is I thought, he is getting people to ask better questions. And that just exploded things, because people were not asking good questions. And they started, after he began talking and they were listening to him, then suddenly they started asking a different set of questions. And that, I think, is what has opened up all of this conversation, is that people are asking a different set of questions. One of the things to me that is so interesting is that we're being compelled by the I'm going to say the poverty of our time to go back to find the treasures that we have left behind. We're being compelled to go back, and we're not finding that, you have certain lights, of philosophy down through the ages, Augustine, Aquinas, Heidegger. You have these people that John Vervaeke has been highlighting in his lecture series, but we're still going back to Plato. We're still going back to Socrates. And I'm thinking about the way that the scriptures make the comment that Christ came in a fullness of time. It's like, but when Christ, at the time that Christ came, it's like there was a certain development within human civilization that was not going to ever go further without him. It was full. It had been completed in some way. And I think we see that in that when we're trying to solve our problems, we end up having to go back and mine these resources from that time, So, I think that I think it is true that people are being not very well served by the educational establishment. But in terms of what to do about it, I'm kind of with that where I am with, I'll say, with food, okay? Because and agriculture, and the economy. You see, this is the thing. You pull on one thread, the whole tapestry starts coming
Yes,
unraveled, right?
yes, it does. Yes, it does. I know.
I'm like, I'm with that where I am. It's like
Mhm.
the system is so big.
Yes.
There's so many interests in it. There's so much investment in it. There's so
Hmm.
many people depending on it for their livelihood and therefore defending it,
Hmm.
and they're not going to let go.
They're
So
not.
all we can do, I think, is work in our own home with our own family. That is really all we can do. I mean, not to have too much of a bunker mentality, or maybe the kind of Benedict adoption mentality or something, but I don't see any way to make systemic changes. So I
Mhm.
kind of would agree with Jordan Peterson there, is that because people would ask him, well, you want to run for political office or do this? And he'd go, I've looked at the whole situation and I've decided that I'm going to focus on the individual. And I think as women with families, you just have to focus on your home and your children and maybe some friends that you can influence.
Mhm.
But I don't see us really being able to tackle the system. Um, you know, I just don't. I mean, it's like the food system. It's like I want to walk in the grocery store and sweep everything off the shelf, or put a big signs and saying, "Don't eat this carbohydrate garbage." I want
Mhm.
to I want to go into where the margarine is and put up a big sign saying, "This stuff is absolute poison. Don't buy it."
I know. I know.
The cereal aisle, and like stand there and tell them, if I see a parent putting it in their car, like throw it out, throw it on the floor, and stop on and say, why are you giving your child this
I
garbage?
know. I know. And it's amazing, the way that God, made our bodies, right? That it can sustain the abuse that we do to it to a certain aspect. You know what I mean?
Right.
It will it will handle a whole lot, right? And then you get to the point where your body just is like, "Duh." But the more you take care of it, the better you start to feel. So, but I understand completely what you're saying. I know. And that's, I think that a lot of with the homeschooling community, at least I can speak for the one that I'm in, that's how, I mean, we look at it like we're raising up a generation, and we realize that. And because what this generation is going to be coming up against, God only knows. Like, I don't know. So they need to be well equipped. So I feel that I need to do my part here for my boys to equip them the best that I can, right? And educating myself through all different means and different thoughts, right? Because one of the things that I love that I heard Christopher Perrin, another guy that I listened to, that said, he says, all truth is God's truth, right? So, it's taking that and being open as well. And, you know, I mean, and that's the thing. It's, you see where the system, you're right, it's tentacles that go way out, right? And there's so much money that's involved. I mean, the money aspect, right, that's involved in education, right? But it started, like I said, this whole turn in during the Industrial Revolution is when a lot of this. So Dewey came onto the scene with a couple other people, but Dewey was one of the main persons. And he was, he was a very well educated man, philosophy, he did theology, all of that, but then kind of, I think, turned a bit, I don't know how much his belief was in God when he started to establish more of his educational, but he's kind of the father, he's known as the father of modern education. And his whole thing, he was taught classically Latin, Greek, but he felt he thought it wasn't practical anymore. His whole thing about was being very practical right? If it isn't practical, I don't know why we're not, I don't, then we shouldn't be teaching it. So the whole thing about, metaphorical truth and all of this type of stuff, he thought he wanted to break all that down and have it very practical. And if it didn't fit into that category per se, then just leave it on the wayside. Right. And so one of the things that he says, okay, I wrote it down here because, yeah, was there certain things that obviously he said, because nothing is ever truly all bad that someone might, come up and be saying that. He had definitely some nuggets of truth here and there, but how he was just totally getting rid of that tradition that was there for for like 2,000 years, and just saying it wasn't worth anything. That had a huge effect on our education system now that we're still under. And so one of the things that he says he says he wanted philosophy to reconnect with a mission of education for living. So he was saying his whole thing was also creating a social criticism, like a social change. He says, if you're going to change society, you go to the school systems, and it's got to be pragmatic. And he says you have to, there's a general level to criticize, to be critical of the criticisms, right? That was like, he wanted everything to be criticized. And this is one of the things that he said. He says knowing, so he talked about like, well, what do you like? There's really no true knowing. And so he says that this is what is about knowing. He says knowing is not a moral exercise of a divine spark. He says, for while knowing is, or an inquiry is included in a calculated or rational element, it is ultimately informed by the body, pretty much how to cope as our animal instincts are. And in a nutshell, kind of the way that he says knowing is not having this divine spark. It's whatever can be calculated, right? Whatever can be measured.
Okay, so if you think about John Vervaeke's like cognitive science, like the fact that we're embodied and that there is a lot of knowing that has to do with our bodies. So there may be a partial truth in that.
Yes, there is.
But my understanding was that, and I don't know how Dewey connects up with this, but my understanding was that one of the reasons why the changes were made in the American school system was that it was a desire to follow the Prussian model. And Prussia, which is, Germany, they were becoming an industrial powerhouse. And that the whole thing was, well, there's two things. One was having a very regulated, militaristic type of mentality among the population. But the other thing was to have people trained to work in this new way, in this new industrial way, which was, okay, so the whole thing, like with the bells ringing in the schools and the lines of the desks and all of that, was because you want the students to be prepared when they get out of the school to go and work in the factories. So you want to train them to that factory mentality from the time that they're young, get them responding to bells and, staying in one spot for a long period of time and things like that. That's my understanding of I don't know how Dewey fits in with that, because it's been ages since I read anything about that. But I do understand the difference that happened with the Industrial Revolution in terms of the way the work of the human person was changed. That it was the idea of fitting the person to the machine, which that was really a new concept. Fit the man to the machine. So I know the school system adapted to produce these workers for this new industrial situation. there's a lot that can be said about that. One thing is, right around the time. Okay, so the Industrial Revolution has a series of stages,
Mhm.
and we moved from being agrarian to being industrial.
Mhm.
The first stage was to get people disconnected from land and get them to move into cities.
Mhm.
And the initial stages of the Industrial Revolution were so horrendous to families. I mean, and you had children working in the factories and all of that. So there was then you had this, so you had a very terrible oppression upon the workers at that time. Then you had all the worker movements that came out of that, and unions, and workers' rights, and then restrictions against child labor and restrictions on how many hours people could be worked and all of that. So it's so it got it did get better, and we can't say that industry did not end up producing a lot of good for us, but
Mhm.
it's not an unmixed blessing. One of the things that has happened over the past 100 years, or it's over 100 years now, so 150 years of this, one of the things that has happened is this industrial model of thinking has ended up being applied
Mhm.
back into the agriculture, back into food,
Mhm.
and so that it's become all of these things end up becoming basically manufactured things rather than
Mhm.
organically produced things.
Mhm.
And
Right.
so, you
Mhm.
know, we have we can't look at any of these things and say, oh, this is all bad. I
Right.
think we
Right.
do have to definitely, you know, do some recalibration now, especially as we see so many of the bad effects on the environment and
Mhm.
on our bodies, which really it's the same thing,
Right.
the
Right.
environment and our bodies, it's the same thing.
Right.
Because
Right.
we and the earth are so connected.
Yes, we are. We are so connected. And then what we said there just really it struck a chord because I agree. I mean, once you say, you know, all of this or all of that is good, all that's bad, you've lost an argument with the logic aspect of it because nothing is ever true. All of this or all of that, there are, like I said, there's certain things with Dewey that he said that his thoughts or that how he set up that made some sense. But it was again kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, just totally getting rid of that whole thinking. When you said the industrial way of thinking tried to go into the agriculture and that whole aspect of thinking, I feel like that's exactly the whole classical way of thinking just got thrown out of the schools, which that part of that thinking helps cultivate that soul, helps cultivate that child in learning how to think and drawing to that child, showing the goodness and that beauty that the child does have, right? That can be cultivated. And when everything is just machine and industrial, or you got to just take this to pass the test, or there's not this meaning that can be grounded in anything with depths and with roots, the sleight of the wind, you get chaos, things start to fall apart. You cut off the base, the foundation, and then what do you have, and that's what I kind of see with Dewey, of some of this, and like I said, there were some good things, but one of his big things was, if you're going to do change, you target the schools,
Well,
because
yeah,
that's how
well,
change happens.
that's how everybody wants to pass the agenda of what they think is good on to the next generation, is through education. What's what we're doing as parents, and that's what the school system is doing. And that's simply the logical thing to do. If you're going to perpetuate your ideas, you got to perpetuate them to the kids. That's why, that's why we have catechism in the churches, for the same reason, to get the kids knowing, those values and those ways of thinking, and, those truths, and then imparting them to the next generation. But, I don't know I just don't think there's anything we can do about the system as a whole, other than to do what, the kind of thing that you're doing. Um, it's because it's too big, and it's too powerful. It's just like Revelation says, the number of the beast. If you don't have this number, you can't buy or sell, right? we're all stuck in this huge monster. It's it's frustrating, but I think you're doing the right thing. You get to pass these things on to your kids. And yet somebody's going to say, so how would you respond to this? And go, okay, so your kids know this stuff about language, and they know this stuff about, maybe they know math or something. What do they have of value in terms of skills that they're going to bring into the workplace? So that's a question. What is the, at some point they have to walk out into the world, and they're either going to have to own something of their own that they can work on and produce a value that someone else is willing to buy, or they're going to have to just be independently wealthy because you've left them $1 million, or they're going to have to actually be able to present themselves to someone and say, I can produce something of value for you. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, part of this whole education, classical way of thinking, is that you're teaching your children how to learn. You're teaching your children how to think. So it doesn't matter what information I put in front of my child as they move up through the school years, and as they get better at this skill, that they will have the tools, because they know how to think about things. They know the type of questions they need to ask. They know where to go find those resources, right? They know maybe also like who to go and ask, that they will be able to, they also know how a sentence is constructed, because we do a lot of diagramming with sentences and labeling sentences and all of that, right? And all of that you don't really see that much in the public school system anymore either. So you not all, once again, not all, but so, and they learn how to communicate. We're teaching them the art of communication. So whatever I put in front of you, you're going to have the tools and know how to dissect that, and know how to see the parts from the whole and bring it together and move forward. So, I believe it gives an overall rich type of education for them, that if they choose to go on to a 4-year university, or if they choose to go on to a trade school, if they choose to go into the military, is that they have the confidence and the ability and the humility on how to learn, right? And and also being a Christian is that you honor people, and you honor God. One of the things with ours is that we always have God in the center, right? And that all subjects reflect to God. God reflects all subjects, and then all subjects are related to one another. Nothing is ever true in isolation. So we show them that pattern. We show them that. So it's never just an isolated thing, right? There's always one of these things you can tap into, something you can ask that will elicit that thought, right? So you can move on. So you can figure out the problem that you're having. So So I don't know. I don't know if that answers someone's
Well,
question,
now
but
you've got boys, so I wonder, what do you think about certain things we might call them maybe manly arts or manly skills, um, like things that they might know how to do, like, how to shoot, how to change a tire,
Mhm.
how to fix a small
Right.
electrical appliance in the home, um, you know, just all kinds of things like that. Like I would call hands-on
Mhm.
practical skills. So
Mhm.
where in your concept, in your ideas about education, where do you put those kinds of things? Do those things have a high importance to you? Do you feel like
Oh,
they'll just get those things after they graduate, or is that something that's part of
mhm.
your ongoing work with them?
Well, um, well, their dad does a lot of things with them
Okay.
regarding that. Like if he's, um, out there changing a tire in the car or something like that, um, he'll bring them out, that kind of thing. They're also in Scout, so there's certain
Okay.
traits as well that they get. So yeah, there's they dabble a little bit with their father and with Scouts, but they will see the importance of that, or you got to make lots of money and hire someone to do it because it's an important skill to have. So either
Right.
you
Yep.
value someone doing that by paying them, or you value it yourself and you learn it yourself. I mean, we have those conversations as well. We have lots of different conversations in our household because I want them to be prepared as much as I can prepare them before they leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think those kind of things are real important because I see that a lot of young, especially young men, don't have a sense of confidence in themselves because basically they don't know how to do anything.
Mhm.
They're they feel incompetent. They feel and sense their own incompetence and their lack of ability to to do something of value in the world. And so I think that when young men have a good, solid set of skills in their belt, that they feel a lot more confident. Now that my husband and I are homeschooling a grandson,
Right.
and I've been doing Memoria Press. You might be familiar with
Oh,
that.
I know. Oh, love. I have Memorial Press stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love Memorial Press. We do their Latin.
Yeah, but he also plays about half a dozen musical instruments, and he's in a program where he's learning how to do engineering on drones
Hmm.
and things like that. So,
Yeah.
so lots of hands-on
Hmm.
kinds of stuff. I kind of wish he had been more like really loving the literature and writing kinds of stuff. But he's really just got more of an engineering mind. So
Well, that's
he
great.
went more in that direction than with me. I would be more like, the humanities, and the literature and all that. Although he does read real well and he does a lot of that, um, but he took off on the other side of the of the
That
right
spectrum.
left brain thing. And so he's off in that.
Yeah.
He likes that all that mechanical stuff.
Hmm.
So yeah, but I think all of this stuff is real important, and it's amazing what you can accomplish in a home.
Oh,
You
it
know,
is. It is.
and I think, like Paul Vanderklay said, a lot of the time that students spend in school is really wasted.
Hmm.
It's really, it's just like it's classroom management with these large schools. Classroom management just takes up so much of the time, more so than the education.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I guess you would say, like with the John Vervaeke stuff, with the dialogos, that your kids are going to be well prepared to enter the dialogue. From what it sounds
Well,
like.
yeah, that's my hope that they can enter that's my hope, you know. Yeah, just to get them equipped. That's my hope that they're able, something I remember that Jordan Peterson said that I found to be so true is that if one of the ways to help set your children up for success is if they are able to communicate well, write well, and think well, you can pretty much write your ticket to anywhere.
Yeah.
And I find that to be so true because, some of my friends that I run with are professors here at some of the local universities. And one is a professor in the humanities. And she's got her master's PhD, and so I like just asking her questions and learning from her and see what that she sees. And I said, what are the things that you see that children are coming in from the schools that you feel that is a positive, and things that are red flags for you? And one of the things that she said that she sees that is a positive is she says the children that do make it through this broken system, those are her words, they're not mine. Those are her words. She goes, the children that make it through this broken system that we have for an educational system, the ones that make it and make it to university, she said they're hungry. They want more. She's like, they know there's more out there and they just want it. They want to be fed. And she goes, and that's fantastic. You see that, you're like, all right, come on, let's go, right? She says where she sees a red flag is, she says, I see it in two areas. She says, one, she says that, and this, she said, how does she put it? She said that they have a lack of sense of entitlement. And she said, I'm not talking about the entitlement that you think that we know now, like, oh, I'm entitled to this or that. She's like, a lot of them, and it's more under what you were talking about, the confidence. She goes, they don't believe they have it to be there. Even though they made it, they lack a confidence, like they just, an ownership of it, and she goes, part of the time I'm just trying to build them up. Like, you've got this, you made it, you can do it, they're hungry, but they're just a lack of confidence. And of course the other, she says the writing. She goes, the writing is atrocious. She goes, I don't know. She says they are not teaching writing. And I told her, I said, you know why they're not teaching writing? Because they're not teaching it as a thinking program. Because writing is really good writing, proper writing is truly a thinking program.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And she said, yeah, you're right. She goes, she has to reteach her children when they come home from school, because they don't know. It's like you give a piece of paper to a child and friends says write, and they're like, I don't know what to write, right? They have like no thought of what to write, right? And she's that's absolutely right. They don't know how to think. They can't come up with a thought, with an idea. And she says the writing is, she goes, we have to start from ground zero on the writing.
Yeah.
So
well, I think that's one of the reasons why responding to literature is such a good way to teach writing. Getting kids to read something that's really good and then respond to it, that gets that thinking, that jumpstarts that process of thinking for them. Because really, their minds don't come furnished.
No.
You have to put some furniture in their minds first before they can start rearranging it. And
Very true. Very true. Very true. Yes, I knew. Andrew Pudois, an excellent writing program, IW, he says, in order to have a thought, you got to put a thought into that mind.
Right.
And that's it. It's like, you got to put that in there in order for them to have that thought, because once they have that thought, then they can start asking, you teach them how to ask good questions about that thought. And then that thought starts to grow and explode. And then before you know it, you have a paper.
And then they can take one piece of literature they've read and they can compare it to another piece of literature. They can start comparing characters. They can start seeing patterns in stories and different things like that. And, even comparing, like, sometimes I'll have my student, compare a book to the movie version of the same story.
Right.
See where are the differences and things like that.
Yeah.
So, I think those things are great. So why do you think more people don't homeschool?
It's a big responsibility. It's scary. It can be hard, it's fearful, and I mean, and I think also, like feel like I have to work. I know homeschooling moms that work and homeschool. I know there are ones that do it, but it is a lot. I understand why people don't homeschool. I'm not putting anyone down for not doing it. Do I believe in homeschooling and think it's one of the best practices? And I'm so grateful that I feel that I believe that God called me to this. I wouldn't choose something else, especially in the state that I live in.
Right.
I mean, yeah, that's a whole other subject. Anyways, so I feel very grateful for that. But yeah, I mean, there's could be a slew of reasons why. Financial, feel that they're not an expert, all those types of different things. It's scary.
Yeah. Well, I tell people you just have to stay one page ahead of the kid.
That's what we call it. You're the lead learner.
Yeah.
You're the lead learner. And I love talking about homeschooling, encouraging parents. So, if anybody wants to know more about it, they can always reach out.
Well, Paul Vanderklay's been real, he's been outspoken about his thoughts about it, how beneficial it is. And, I do think that the economics of it are a big problem for a lot of families because we have an economy that has really made it so difficult for families to survive on one income.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a whole nother problem. See, it's like I said, like everything's so related. The larger economic situation affects, the amount of time that women can spend at home, the amount of time they can spend with children. It has such an effect on everything. So once we start poking at any one of these things, we're poking at the whole edifice.
Mm-hmm.
But well, it's been really great to talk to you. You're so enthusiastic about all of these topics. It's great.
No.
Was there anything else that you wanted to mention?
I think I can't think I think we went through a lot of it. I know there was probably other things, but I can't think off the top of my head right now. But I love speaking to you, and I love the stuff that you post as well. So yeah.
Well, thank you. What did you? Was there anything that you particularly liked that doing? Is it the Ratzinger book or the stuff about femininity and masculinity, or anything in particular that that you liked?
Yeah, I mean the Ratzinger, the one that you just posted with the comment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that fascinating. I got through most of it. And I know it's a short video, but then I had to end up going. But yeah, that fascinating how that gentleman looked at that and how you kind of broke it down. And then the one with the patterns that you had, what was it? The patterns that you had with that one gentleman with the chalkboard, the core.
Oh,
that
yeah,
blew my mind.
right. The Jeff Lawton video that I put, that I mentioned in my second class video. Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, I keep trying to get people to watch that because I know that people probably click on it and they go, oh, it doesn't look, when you start off, it doesn't look like it's going anywhere, right? You gotta kind of be patient and sit and watch what he does. And by the time he gets to the end, you're like, what? The way he draws it all together. But yeah, now Jeff Lawton is, don't know if you looked at any of the other stuff on his channel about how he's changing the deserts. He's been asked by some governments in the Middle East to come and work in some of the desert areas, some of the hottest, driest areas of the world. And he starts doing these things with this succession planting, where he starts off with these plants that, can really take the conditions, and he gradually adds more plants and more. And just, he makes these forests grow in the desert. It's just amazing. But it shows what you can do if you're really in tune with the earth and you really understand the cycles of nature, and you understand the way to, because in the desert, according to him, there's a lot of things that are dormant. It's like you get all these life forms that they can last there for, I guess hundreds of years or something, but they go into crystallized little, they go into dormant forms. And when you start getting the water there, and you start getting the plants that have because the plants, when they photosynthesize, will send things down into the soil, and they start waking up that life that's dormant there, and the whole process starts, and it brings it to life. It's just amazing. So I love stuff like that. I really think that we've got to get better at the way that we're treating the earth. And when we do that, we'll get better at the way we're treating our bodies and our health. So it's all connected together.
Yes, it is.
So, all right. Well, Karla, is great talking to you. And I'm gonna, I guess with your permission, I'll post this on my channel. Are you good with that?
Yeah, if you think so.
Oh, people are going to so much enjoy you and all your enthusiasm, and the other homeschooling moms in this little corner of the internet are going to be connecting with you, and people that have questions about homeschooling might want to connect with you too. So I think it'll be great.
Okay.
I just really appreciate all your thoughts, and that you're here and you're getting into the conversation. It's terrific.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I've learned so much from you, Mary, and how you hold all that information in your head. I'm like, it's amazing. So I appreciate
that. You got a lot of information in your head too.
I've got a bunch of notes I have to keep looking at. It's all good. It's one foot in front of the other. So
definitely, yeah. All right. Well, God bless, Karla, and thanks so much. And we'll be talking. We'll be talking again sometime, I'm sure. All right.
Yeah, sure. All right, Mary. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.